summer. We are in Ephesians chapter 4. Now, some of you are note takers, okay? If you are a note taker, I beg your forgiveness right now, okay? Because I changed things slightly. This is what it was originally, okay? I said, walk right, wear right, verses 1 to 16. But if you're a note taker, you will want to make this change. Notice that I bumped it a few verses. The walk right section it covers 17, 18, and 19, which is what you and I will cover tonight. And then we will get into the wear the right clothing. We'll get into that at a later time. But tonight, 17, 18, and 19, I reassessed as I was studying and thought, why didn't I include this in the first section on walking right? Because it talks about walking, so that makes sense. And so we're going to be in this section, verses 1 to 19. Now, here's what we've done. Again, for the note takers. If you're not a note taker, just hang tight. We'll be back in a moment. But we've already looked at graciousness toward one another, verses 1 to 6. Last time we were together, gifts for one another, verses 7 to 16. Tonight, we will look at godlessness to avoid. When you are walking, some of us are accident prone. Anybody in here clumsy, accident prone? And you'll admit, okay, some of you are admitting it. You're like, yeah, I always get hurt, man. Whatever it is, it might be that you're walking somewhere and you're talking or looking at your phone, or maybe it's just you and you just find things to trip over, or you find things to bump into. Some of us are like that, and then some of us are like that at for seasons of our lives, and then then the muscles all kick in or whatever. I don't know what happens. But when we consider walking right, there are things that we want to avoid. And in this case, for the church, it's godlessness. Now, let me just remind you real quickly. In Ephesians chapter 4, Paul is writing to the Ephesians to tell them how the church is going to be successful, how they're going to be unified. And so they got to be walking right. They've got to have graciousness toward one another. And then gifts. We've all been given spiritual gifts. And those were given to us so that we could bless one another, so that we could serve in the church. And that's what we looked at last time. And tonight we will look at this last section, which is the godlessness to avoid. Let me get that title up there. There it is right there. Verses 17, 18, and 19, because there are things that if you and I are going to be, and this is a part of the church, okay? We're a part of Revival Christian Fellowship. We are part of the worldwide Church of Jesus, Church of God. But in a sense, we do have our own small church here within this building, within these walls, within this ministry. But obviously we are a part of the body of Christ. So, but in order for us, you and I, as a group, to walk right, to walk properly, as a healthy group, we need to avoid godlessness. And so that's what we're going to look at today. And these are not fun verses, but they are absolutely necessary. And again, as I was studying, I thought, man, I keep trying to cover a bigger section and move along faster. But as I'm coming to these verses, I'm realizing the importance of them and that I cannot just rush through these things. And maybe, perhaps, this verses 17, 18, and 19, maybe these are some of the most important ones that I will share with you as a group of high school students. And we'll find out why here in just a moment. But godlessness to avoid, we pick it up in verse 17, and Paul is just continuing his thoughts about the church being healthy and functioning properly. And he says in verse 17, this I say therefore. So he's referring back to what he's taught us already. That we need to, that we've got spiritual gifts that we need to use to serve one another, that we need to be gracious toward one another. He now says, with that in mind, this I say, therefore. So with those things in mind, he says, this I say, therefore, and testify in the Lord. In other words, he's calling the Lord in as witness and saying, hey, the Lord would agree with me when I say these things. And really what it is Paul agreeing with God. But he says, I testify in the Lord. So in other words, I'm telling the truth here, okay? I testify in the Lord that you should no longer walk as the rest of the Gentiles walk. Now we'll stop there for just a moment so that we can talk about that phrase, that you should no longer walk. That would indicate that the Ephesians, that they were walking this way. And when it says walk, that is a term that it's synonymous with living. Okay? So if you're walking with the Lord, that means you're living with the Lord. If you're walking for the Lord, you're living for the Lord. Okay? So walking and living, same thing. Okay? He says that you should no longer walk in a certain way. Now, he's going to tell us the way as we get into this. But it's important to understand that the Ephesians at one time had been living like this. Okay? They had been living like this. Now, whether they were still living like that at this point, and Paul is telling them, hey, you got to stop that. I do not think that, but it's possible. The Corinthians were a pretty messy church. And Paul had to tell them, hey, you got to quit living foul, man. Because they were still living foul, even though they were saved. And he would call them brothers or saints, but then he would rebuke them for the way they were living. But it wouldn't seem to me that the Ephesians were living this way anymore, but he's just reminding them that you got to stay away from this stuff. But again, maybe they were living that way when he wrote the letter, and so he's correcting them. Nevertheless, we find out how we should no longer be walking, that you should no longer walk. So don't walk this way. Which way? As the rest of the Gentiles walk. So we want to make sure that we know which way not to walk. When my son was little, he really, really loved Batman. And he really loved the old school show, Batman, with the gray tights. And, just Batman and Robin. I can't remember the actor's name right now. But anyways, the actor, when my son was little, had passed away. And we were at the dinner table, I remember, and somebody, I don't remember who it was in my family, but somebody said, hey, did you guys hear that Batman passed away? Because they couldn't remember the actor's name. And my son, being a little guy and he loved Batman, he said, which way? In other words, he passed away, like, which way did he pass? Well, we want to make sure we know which way we're going. If somebody passed away, we don't necessarily want to follow them, right? We want to know, if I'm following somebody, which way is that individual going? That's always important to know, okay? It doesn't matter where you're at, on the school campus, in your neighborhood. If you're playing sports and somebody's trying to show you how to do something, it's like, let's ask the coach first to make sure that's the right way to do it, because if it's not, I don't want to learn the wrong way. I don't want to go in the wrong direction. And so he says that you should no longer walk as the rest of the Gentiles walk. Now, the second part of that is this, that the Ephesians, it seems to me that they were basically Gentiles. Now, because you're a student in here, you know what a Gentile is. That's anybody that's not a Jew. There were Jews and Gentiles. And so the Ephesian church had Gentiles in it. I think that there were also some Jews there, but it sounds to me like there were a lot of Gentiles. And Paul is telling them here, you should no longer walk as the rest of the Gentiles walk. In other words, just because they're Gentiles doesn't mean they have to live like the rest of the Gentiles that are not saved. Okay? Just because I'm Hispanic doesn't mean I have to be in a gang. Right? Just because there are a bunch of Hispanics or Latinos that are in gangs doesn't mean I have to be in a gang. So that's the point that he's making. Or just because the people that look like me have the same color skin or whatever, just because they all do this thing doesn't mean I have to do that thing. Okay? That would also apply. Just because all the girls right now at school are doing this doesn't mean that you as a girl have to do that. Or if you're a guy, if all the guys are doing this thing, doesn't mean that you have to do that thing. So Paul is telling him that, using that reasoning and saying, listen, we should no longer walk, that you should no longer walk as the rest of the Gentiles walk. So you don't have to live like them anymore, he's telling them. So we ask this, okay, well, what do you mean? Like, which way are they walking? Okay, remember, we always want to know which way are they walking. That way we know which way to avoid. If we're going on a hike and you get to, the trailhead and somebody goes, oh man, the trail splits up ahead and one of the trails leads to a cliff and somebody fell off the cliff and died. you want to know which way they went so that you can go, which way did they go, to the right or to the left? Because whatever it was, I want to go the opposite way, right? So I want to know which way to avoid, and that's what Paul is telling them here. Now, there are 8 characteristics, 8 things that he's going to tell us, 8 different things that we should not be doing if we want to walk right, without tripping over things, without being hindered. And the first thing that he mentions is in the futility of their mind. Let's see, did I put that up? Yes, I did. In the futility of their mind. Now, the futility of their mind means, the word futility or futile means depraved, perverse, or useless. Now, you are going to find that many of the things that we are going to list here, and I told you there were 8, 4, 5, 6, 7, and what did I do? 1, 2, 3, that's 8. I'm sorry, I'm mixed up on my own notes. It is 8. The futility of the mind. That means that you're going to find that many of these characteristics have to do with, dun, 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 sexual perversion, okay? I do not mean to be awkward when I say that. This is not a sex ed class. I'm not going into all kinds of detail. I will mention some things that you need to know, but that's just for you and your parents to talk about, okay? Not me. You just need to know that as far as these things to avoid, much of it has to do with sexual perversion. And it starts right here with the futility of the mind, and that the mind is depraved, meaning it's totally gone, it's lost. It's also perverse, but it's also useless. I mean, you probably know people like this, especially some of you young ladies. You probably know some of the guys that their minds are just, they're gone and they're useless. Sometimes us guys, it's harder to tell because we think it's kind of cool. That's kind of cool how you fell off that building, huh? And we don't always see those things as, we don't always make the distinction. But the futile mind is a mind that is depraved, that is perverse, and it is useless. They have a mind, but they are not using it correctly. It's a waste, just wasting their brain cells. So it begins with us needing to avoid a futile mind, a useless mind. Christianity is unique for many different reasons. But one of those reasons is that we are very much encouraged to think logically and to engage our mind in what it is that we're reading and to understand it and know it and to be able to share it with other people. We have to use our minds. We've got to make sure that our mind is engaged. And we've got to be using it for the right purposes. Everybody, I'm sure you don't have to raise your hand or say amen out loud because it might be embarrassing. But if you and I are left, bored, nothing to do, the mind, man, can start coming up with all kinds of craziness. I don't want that to happen. I want to be careful. I want to avoid the futility of the mind. So the Gentiles walk in the futility of their mind, but he mentions several other things, 4 more things, in fact, in verse 18, and then a few things in verse 19. Here's the next thing in verse 18. They, that's these Gentiles, having their understanding darkened, okay? I said, I messed up. I am so sorry. What did I do? Okay, I'm going to leave this one off there for right now if you're taking notes. Just imagine that. There's a darkened understanding there. You see it for yourself in verse 18. Having their understanding darkened. This means that there is an absence of spiritual understanding. They have no concept. You might be trying to share the good news, the gospel, the Bible with a friend, and you're noticing that they just do not have any kind of concept of it at all. They're not grasping it. They don't understand. I remember many years ago sitting with a family member, and my dad was sitting down at the table with her and sharing the gospel and the things of God. And we sat there, it seemed like for a long time. I don't know, it could have been 20 minutes, half an hour, could have been an hour, I don't remember. But he was talking to her about things and explaining the gospel very clearly and the fact that we cannot save ourselves and that we need a Savior. And then he asked this family member at the end, he said, so if you were to die today, where do you think you would go? And this family member, to my astonishment, said, well, I think I'll go to heaven. He said, why? She said, well, because I've done a lot of good works. Even though he had just explained to her that you cannot get to heaven by good works, he had spent whatever it was, half hour, whatever it was, but she had no concept whatsoever. And it was amazing to me. I just thought, not in a good way, I just thought, oh my goodness, she didn't hear, she had no spiritual understanding, she could not grasp spiritual things, and she was just totally lost. And that's how so many people are. In fact, he's saying that these people in society that are, they're not saved, many of them, not all of them, not everybody fits into this category. Just because someone's not saved doesn't mean they've gone to these depths, but they're headed that way. And so the darkened understanding means an absence of spiritual understanding. The next thing, you already saw it right there, a separation from God, he says in verse 18, having their understanding darkened, being alienated from the life of God. Now this is scary, because this means that there is no presence of God in their life. Now why is that scary? Some people, that's what they dream of. You ask them, hey, where are you going, when you die? You going to go to heaven or hell? And there are some people, just fools, who will say, oh, I'm going to hell, man. I don't want to go to heaven. I'm going to hell. I'm going to be there. I'm going to party with my friends, and God's not there. I don't want to be anywhere God is. Well, some people are already experiencing that absence of God in their life, the separation from God. What it means is it means lots of different things, but it means there's no conviction of the Spirit. There are no borders, no guidelines. There's nothing. In other words, you're left on your own to figure out what's right and what's wrong. And is walking into a room, pulling out a gun and shooting everybody wrong? If you think so, why? If there's no God, if you're totally separated from God, and there are no rules, there's no guidelines, there's no God, then what reason do you have to give me not to do so? How can you prove that it's wrong? You can't. There's no standard. So when my life is void of God, when I'm separated from God, then it's anything goes. Then I can do anything. And you'll see the depths to which they go. He says, having their understanding darkened, being alienated from the life of God. Here's the next one, because of the ignorance that is in them. The ignorance also in verse 18. This would indicate a moral blindness. They're blind to morality. They have no standard, again, of morality. What's right, what's wrong? It's left to them to decide what's right and what's wrong. And when it's left to you and I to decide what's right and what's wrong, that's when bad things happen. Because people just decide in their own mind, well, this is right for me to do this thing. Yes, I know I'll hurt other people, but I feel justified. I feel like this is a good thing for me to prove my point or to make my case. And so they move forward in that. It's moral blindness. They're ignorant of morality. There's no moral standard. The next thing that he mentions here in verse 18, in my Bible it says because of the blindness of their heart. I don't know what your Bible says there at the end of verse 18. It actually means hardness of their heart. The word there where blindness would be should be hardness, and I'll tell you why. Because if you go back and you look in the original language, it is the word porosis, P-O-R-O-S-I-S, porosis. And it doesn't mean blindness, but it means hardness. It means to be calloused. Sometimes you might get a thorn in your skin, and if you can't dig it out, then extra skin begins to grow over it, and it becomes calloused. If you're using your hands to work a lot, some of your dads probably, and your moms too, probably from doing different things, doing the same kind of jobs, they probably have some calluses on their hands. Well, that's a picture of this heart, the hardness of the heart. Again, porosis means hardness, calloused. It actually was used to describe a stone that was harder than marble. Some of you have seen marble before. Probably all of us have at some point or another. marble. This was used to describe a stone that was harder than marble. I mean, it's like, I'm thinking, how do you get harder than marble? How's it even possible? And yet there was stone that was harder than marble. There was an episode when Jesus healed a blind man, and it tells us in the Gospels, in the New Testament, in the Gospels, that the priests, the religious leaders, that they hardened their heart toward Jesus, and they actually wanted to kill him. That's the same word that's used there. Porosis, hardness, calloused, harder than marble. These things are characteristic or describe the individual who is godless, who has pushed God out of their lives. We move on to verse 19. We see who, same people, being past feeling. I'm going to switch screens here. Let's see, where's it at? There we are. Past feeling, verse 19. This is part of the list there. Being past feeling. Who being past feeling have given themselves over to lewdness, to work all uncleanness with greediness. We'll talk about the rest of that in just a moment. But the phrase past feeling means that they have lost all sensitivity. Everybody in here has had dental work done before. There might even be some videos floating around in your family, of when you came out of the doctor or the orthodontist, and you had been under, on some kind of heavy medication, and, they get all those funny videos, and maybe they've got one of you, drooling or crying or telling some crazy story. We'll ask your parents for some of those. But you have that medication in your mouth wherever they were doing the dental work, and there's no sensitivity there. And sometimes, I remember when I was younger and I went to the dentist sometimes, and, they'd pump you full of Novocaine or whatever it was they were using. And then, it's like, I can't feel this side of my face, and you'd be poking and poking and poking, there's nothing there. And then you start biting on it, start gnawing on it, or at least I did. And you start gnawing on it, because it would give you what we call ansias. It would make you anxious. And you start, it's like, I can't feel it. And before you know it, it's like you're starting to chew a hole in your cheek because you can't feel it. There's no sensitivity. Well, spiritually speaking, these people are that way, who being past feeling. It's as if they've been shot spiritually with some kind of Novocaine, something to numb, and now they're beyond feeling. It's a scary place to be when there's just no sensitivity whatsoever. And, we see people like that all the time in our society, more and more. A loss of all sensitivity. The next thing he mentions is who being past feeling, because they're past feeling, have given themselves over to lewdness. Here's what I called that. I said they love lewdness. Now, what is lewdness? It means unbridled lust. Everybody knows what lust is. Unbridled meaning, if you have a horse that's unbridled, man, it means it's just loose to just run around. Just something that's unbridled means it's just loose to run around. This is unbridled lust. The lewdness means unbridled lust. A couple of other words that were used, that were synonymous with lewdness: outrageousness, shamelessness. This is this is a perfect example of our society today. Because lewdness or sexual immorality, lust, is just put on display for everybody to see and hear and experience. It's just out in the open. And did you know that the ancient Greek societies, that's where they ended up too? And the Roman ancient societies ended up in that place too. Unbridled lust, sexual immorality just out in the open. And it was no longer sexual immorality, it was just sexuality. It was not considered immoral anymore by the larger part of society. And are the Greek or Roman ancient societies still around? No. Greece is still there, Rome is still there. But those ancient societies are no longer. Why? It was the downfall of those societies and others like that. They love lewdness. These people have given themselves over, meaning they are totally committed. The way that you gave yourself over to Jesus, they have given themselves over to unbridled lust. These are the perverted people, man, that always, the mind, the phone, they always want to show you something perverted. They always have some dirty joke that they want to share with you. And you realize that their mind, like our pastor says, that their mind is like a racehorse. It runs best in the dirt. And they just can't seem to get their mind out of the dirt. Everything they come up with, everything they see, has some sexual spin on it. It's unbridled lust. It's outrageousness. It's shamelessness. It is men who cross-dress as women and put on shows for adults and children. It's parades where sexual immorality, called pride, is put on display in city streets. There are cities in the United States where they have these naked rides, where people go out on their bicycles purposely, completely, absolutely naked. And they just ride through the town to put it on display. And so many of these things are sanctioned and protected by local governments. The city knows about it. They give them a permit to do it. That's where we're headed, folks. And I got some bad news for you. There's no turning back. We are on a downward slide, and there's no turning back. Is there good news still? Yes. Is there hope still for some? Absolutely there is. But as a society, there's no turning back. And I'm not talking about the rest of the world even, which the rest of the world, yes, but I'm talking about the good old US of A. We are on a downhill slide. And God may save some, and there may be a revival at some point, but we are on a downhill slide. Is there hope? Am I telling you that to say, hey, you got, just get out of here. There's no hope. Get out of here. No, I'm not. That's not why I'm telling you that. Let's finish this up. Verse 8. Here's the last one. I'm sorry, verse 19. I said number 8. I think it might actually be number 9 because, again, I skipped one. Sorry about that. But here's the last one. Greedy workers of uncleanness. This is talking about, again, sexual uncleanness. But the fact that he says in verse 19, look at this, who being past feeling have given themselves over to lewdness. They're completely committed. They're in head first. To work all uncleanness, that's again, sexual uncleanness, with greediness. What this phrase means, this greedy workers of uncleanness, it means that it is a sexual uncleanness with a continual lust for more. Now, again, I'm not going into details and sharing. You guys, you get the picture, you get the point. But let me share something with you. And I'm sharing this with you because you are our next wave of leaders. You're on the cusp. Your minds, your worldview is being developed right now in your life. The things that you are going to believe in 20 and 30 years are being developed and set in stone right now. So let me share something with you. There is a segment of our world, a segment of society that is pushing hard for the sexualization of society, period. What do I mean by that? I mean that there are people in this world, even in the United States, who want the freedom to have sex with anybody and anything. Kids, animals. And as I stand here before you today, I don't know if I'll still be alive when this happens, but I'm telling you it's coming. It's going to happen. It's not a matter of if, it's when. It's going to happen. There are people pushing already. It's going to happen. So my question is, what do you think about that? What are you going to do about it? You cannot stop it. Can it be hindered for a time? Perhaps it can. It certainly can be spoken out against. And we can pray for God's mercy and pray for God to revive, to bring a revival, to renew, to save, and to renew so many. But the fact is that is where society is coming. And you can go and look at end time events in the Bible, and you can search and search and search, and the United States is not there. Why are they not there? Because there's coming a time, I believe, in our future when we will no longer be what we are right now. All it's doing is getting worse. And what did God say in Ezekiel? People of the land practice extortion. They commit robbery. They mistreat the poor and needy, denying them justice. So I looked for a man among them who would build up the wall and stand in the gap on behalf of the land so that I would not have to destroy it. And then he said there in Ezekiel, but I found none. One of the saddest verses in the entire Bible, but I found none. What about you guys? Where will you stand? As those things are coming down the pike, where will you stand? What is your thought on that? What do you believe? Do you believe what this thing says? Or will you lower your standards and say, well, it's just freedom. Everybody should be free to do whatever they want. Why do I need to know these things? Why do we need to know these things before we close? For two reasons, I think. Maybe somebody could come up with more. Why do we need to know these things? Why did we have to study this? Why did we have to take 20 minutes, 25 minutes to look at this list, man? This is not how we're living. The first reason is this: for the life of the church. In other words, you and I, if the church is to be the church and to be successful and be what it should be, you and I cannot be engaged in these things. And if you ever find yourself engaged in those things and you're part of the church, you need to stop. If you know someone that's part of the church and they are engaged in those things, then you need to address that. Because it must be absent from the church. It must be void. It's got to be gone. It cannot be a part of the church and have a healthy church. It cannot be. Right? We cannot, period. We cannot be living in sin, period, and have a healthy church. So these things especially, they must be missing from the church. So what does that mean? Does that mean that, we only need good people here at church? Well, go out there and try to find a good person. Not going to find one. Which leads me to my second point. Why do we need these things not only for the life of the church, but to develop in us a love for the lost? Family, there are friends of yours that are headed in this direction. Those things that I mentioned, those 8 or 9 things that I mentioned, they're headed in that direction already. Some of you are already aware of it, and you could think of people right now, and you go, no, I already know some people like that. What does that do in us? When we hear these things, this unbridled lust, this loss of sensitivity, this sexual uncleanness, this hardness, this absence, all of these different things, what does that develop in us? Does it develop in us a hatred for those people? It ought not do that. It ought to develop in us a love for the lost. Now, I will tell you right now, the entire world is not going to be saved. You can go and preach to the entire world is not going to be saved. In fact, many are called, few are chosen. So the fact is that the gospel will be preached to everybody, but only a few will surrender their hearts to the Lord. But those few, that's part of our job. We're here doing our best to live a consecrated, a life that's separated to God, that we're God's people, and we're doing our best, and we mess up. That's true. But we're doing our best to follow the Lord. And we're trying not to live as the rest of the, or trying to walk as, we're not trying to walk as the rest of the Gentiles walk. We are trying to be different. We're trying to follow the Lord. And as we do that, we become a safe haven or a hospital or a beacon, a lighthouse for those that are outside and are lost, that are caught up in that kind of a lifestyle, that are living that lifestyle, and then they one day they go, man, this is, why am I even doing these things? This is nasty. This is there any hope in the world? And then we're here to go, yes. And the doors open and come in before it's too late, man. And we bring them in. We welcome them in. And we help them to change, to no longer walk as the rest of the Gentiles walk. It should develop in us a love for the lost. John 3:16, everybody knows it. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever would believe in him would not perish but have everlasting life. What does the next verse say? For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. Wait a minute. God doesn't want to condemn the world? No. Is the world going to be condemned? Largely, yes. But that's not God's desire. God wants to save people. And so we need to strike that balance of living holy lives and also reaching out to the unholy and doing our best to draw them in. These verses should develop in us a love for the lost, a love for the church, a desire to see it healthy and living right, but also a love for the lost. Do I have a love for the lost? Jesus, when he was here, he had a love for the lost. He had a genuine love for the lost. Do I have a love for the lost, for the weird, for the strange, for the pervert, for the thief, for the unclean, the lewd, those that are the hard of heart, those that are separated from? Do I have a love for them? Jesus had a love for them. Do I have that same heart? I want to have that same kind of a heart. And so these verses, though they're gross. It's like, man, let's get out of here. I just want to go home and take a shower. I don't want to hear about all this stuff. But the only hope for people to be saved is God's salvation through Jesus being preached by you and I, being lived out to the best of our ability by you and I. We are God's lighthouse in this dark world right now. And we want to make sure that we're reaching out. And so those friends that you have and you go, man, I can think of a friend that's like this. You need to be praying for them and inviting them to know the Lord and inviting them to church and saying, hey, man, there's another way to live, a better way. And you don't have to live that way. You can be set free. Father, thank you so much for tonight and for your word.